Sometimes the most dangerous thing in a room full of powerful people is a quiet person who truly understands beauty. The champagne glass slipped from a waiter's tray and shattered across the marble floor at exactly 9:17 p.m., but almost nobody turned to look. The guests inside the Blackwood Foundation Gala had grown immune to noise. Crystal laughter echoed beneath gold chandeliers. Diamond bracelets flashed beneath warm Manhattan light. Men worth hundreds of millions discussed acquisitions beside towering windows overlooking Central Park, while a string quartet struggled to be heard above the sound of wealth performing itself. Nathaniel Blackwood stood near the grand staircase with one hand inside the pocket of his midnight blue tuxedo, staring at the city below without really seeing it. At 48, he had become the kind of man newspapers described with words like untouchable, disciplined, visionary. The richest investor in the room. Maybe the richest man in New York tonight. Yet none of those titles stopped the exhaustion sitting behind his steel-gray eyes. "Sir, the mayor just arrived," his assistant whispered carefully beside him. Nathaniel gave a small nod, but said nothing. Across the ballroom, cameras flashed as politicians and collectors drifted toward the center like planets orbiting attention itself. A famous concert pianist had just begun performing Chopin near the East Wing piano, though from Nathaniel's expression, one might have assumed the man was ruining it instead. Wrong tempo. Too much ego. Not enough silence between the notes. Nathaniel loosened his jaw slightly. The performer wasn't listening to the music. He was listening to himself. Near the back of the room, Evelyn Carter balanced a silver tray against one palm while weaving quietly through tuxedos and evening gowns. 26 years old. Blonde hair tied into a clean low bun. Black server uniform pressed perfectly despite the 14-hour shift already weighing on her shoulders. Most guests never looked directly at her. To them, she was part of the architecture. Another invisible detail holding luxury together. But Evelyn noticed everything. The nervous tapping of a senator's wedding ring. The fake laugh from a tech billionaire near the bar. The way Nathaniel Blackwood stood completely still whenever the piano reached a difficult passage, almost as if he was waiting for the music to disappoint him again. "Careful, sweetheart," a drunken guest muttered as she passed. "These floors cost more than your salary." His friends chuckled softly. Evelyn simply steadied the champagne glasses and continued walking. No reaction, no embarrassment. That calmness irritated people more than anger ever could. Nathaniel noticed that too. His eyes followed her for only a second before returning toward the piano. The performer had reached the emotional center of the ballade now, but something felt hollow. Mechanical. Empty. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. Then the pianist missed 3 notes in a row, barely noticeable to most of the room. But Nathaniel heard it instantly. So did Evelyn. Her fingers tightened slightly around the tray. The final chord collapsed awkwardly beneath scattered applause. Some guests clapped out of politeness. Others resumed talking before the piece even ended. The pianist stood, smiling arrogantly as if nothing had happened. Nathaniel looked away in disappointment. And somewhere behind him, almost hidden beneath the noise of crystal glasses and distant laughter, a soft voice quietly whispered, "Chopin deserved better than that." Nathaniel turned slightly toward the sound of the voice before he could stop himself. The sentence had not been loud. In fact, it had almost disappeared beneath the orchestra of conversation surrounding the ballroom. But he heard it clearly, maybe because it was honest. Evelyn had already resumed walking by the time his eyes found her again. Calm posture, steady hands, not the nervous energy most servers carried around wealthy people. She moved past a table of investors discussing private aviation contracts and stopped beside an older woman whose hands trembled slightly while reaching for her water glass. Without interrupting the conversation, Evelyn quietly adjusted the placement of the silverware to make the glass easier to reach. Small gesture, almost invisible. The older woman smiled gratefully anyway. Nathaniel watched the exchange from across the room with an unfamiliar feeling pressing quietly against his thoughts. Curiosity. "Another disappointing performance?" asked Senator Whitmore as he approached with a champagne flute in hand. Nathaniel barely glanced at him. Technique without restraint is noise pretending to be art. The senator laughed politely despite clearly not understanding what he meant. Well, everyone else seemed impressed. Nathaniel looked toward the piano again where guests now crowded around the performer, congratulating him with exaggerated admiration. That is usually the problem. Across the ballroom, Evelyn disappeared briefly through the kitchen doors carrying an empty tray. The moment the heavy doors closed behind her, the atmosphere changed instantly. No chandeliers, no violin music, just fluorescent lights buzzing softly above stainless steel counters while exhausted kitchen staff moved around one another with mechanical efficiency. Steam curled from industrial sinks. Someone cursed quietly near the dishwasher station. Another server rubbed her swollen ankles against the edge of a supply shelf. Evelyn set the tray down beside the coffee station and exhaled slowly. "You survived table 12?" Another waitress asked while tying her apron tighter. "Barely." Evelyn smiled faintly. "One of them tried to explain cryptocurrency to me for 20 minutes. The girl laughed. "That is still better than the theater producer who asked if I knew how to pronounce Bordeaux." Evelyn reached for a stack of clean napkins, but before she could answer, the ballroom doors reopened. The sound of applause drifted faintly into the kitchen. "Looks like piano guy recovered," someone muttered. Evelyn's expression shifted almost invisibly. Not annoyance. Sadness. She glanced toward the distant music as if hearing something nobody else could. "No," she said quietly. He did not. The older chef near the stove noticed her expression. "You play?" he asked casually while plating sea bass beneath warm lights. Evelyn hesitated half a second too long. "Not anymore." The chef nodded once, recognizing the tone immediately. Not anymore usually meant once upon a time. Before more questions could follow, the event manager hurried into the kitchen looking panicked. "We have a problem," she whispered sharply. "Mr. Bellamy is refusing to go back out there." "The pianist?" Apparently someone criticized his interpretation. Several staff exchanged uncomfortable glances. The event manager lowered her voice further. Mr. Blackwood requested another piece, and Bellamy stormed off to the bar instead. The chef sighed heavily. Rich people exhausting each other again. A few tired laughs followed, but Evelyn remained still. Somewhere beyond the ballroom wall, the Steinway piano sat silent beneath a crystal chandelier, while 200 wealthy strangers pretended not to notice the awkwardness settling over the gala. Then, from outside the kitchen doors, a single unfinished chord drifted softly through the hallway. Evelyn froze. Her eyes lifted slowly. Chopin, Ballade No. 1, left unresolved. The unfinished chord lingered in the air like a question nobody in the ballroom knew how to answer. Conversations softened instinctively. A few guests glanced toward the piano with polite confusion while others continued sipping champagne. Pretending sophistication meant never acknowledging discomfort. Nathaniel remained near the staircase, his attention fixed entirely on the silent Steinway beneath the chandelier. He knew that chord. More importantly, he knew where it should have gone next. But no one moved toward the piano. Not the performer currently drinking expensive scotch at the bar with wounded pride. Not the eager socialites hoping to impress investors. The room hesitated in collective uncertainty. Then Evelyn stepped through the ballroom doors carrying a fresh tray of champagne flutes. She stopped almost immediately. One unfinished phrase. That was all it took. Her eyes lifted toward the piano without meaning to. Nathaniel noticed the change in her expression before anyone else did. Something softened there. Not nostalgia exactly. Something more dangerous. Recognition. One of the event coordinators rushed past her whispering frantically into a headset while guests began murmuring about the awkward silence surrounding the performance area. Evelyn lowered her gaze and resumed walking. Professional. Controlled. Invisible again. But the melody had already followed her into the room. As she passed the piano, her pace slowed almost imperceptibly. The unfinished chord still echoed in her memory. Her fingers tightened slightly around the tray. Wrong pedal timing. Too much pressure in the left hand. Chopin was never supposed to sound arrogant. "Excuse me," a man near the piano called out lazily. "Maybe one of the waitstaff can finish the concert." A few nearby guests laughed softly. Another voice joined in. "Only if she knows where middle C is." More scattered laughter. Nathaniel did not smile. He watched Evelyn carefully instead. Most people reacted to humiliation immediately. Anger, embarrassment, forced politeness. But Evelyn simply set a champagne glass onto a nearby table with calm precision. Then she looked toward the piano again. Not at the audience. Not at the wealthy strangers waiting for entertainment. Just the piano. The ballroom lights reflected softly across its black polished surface. For one strange second, The noise around her seemed to disappear entirely. Nathaniel felt it too. The silence before something irreversible. "Miss?" The event manager whispered urgently beside Evelyn. "Please ignore them." Evelyn nodded once. She should have walked away. Every practical instinct told her to keep moving. Finish the shift. Stay unnoticed. Go home. But another unfinished note drifted through her mind. And suddenly she was 19 years old again, sitting alone inside a practice room at midnight while rain struck the conservatory windows and her father whispered, "Music dies the moment people stop listening honestly." Evelyn slowly placed the tray onto a passing server's cart. The nearby guests quieted with growing curiosity. Nathaniel straightened slightly. "What is she doing?" someone whispered. Evelyn walked toward the piano with measured steps that carried no drama at all. No performance. No attempt to impress anyone. The famous pianist near the bar noticed her too late. "Excuse me," he scoffed loudly. "That instrument costs more than your apartment." A few uncomfortable laughs followed. Evelyn stopped beside the piano bench. For the first time all night, she looked directly toward the crowd. Not nervous, not defiant, just calm. Then her eyes found Nathaniel Blackwood standing across the ballroom. Something unreadable passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or loneliness recognizing itself. Nathaniel said nothing. He simply held her gaze for one quiet second and gave the smallest nod imaginable. Permission. The room fell still as Evelyn Carter finally sat down at the piano. For a moment, nobody in the ballroom moved. The crystal chandeliers glowed softly above hundreds of motionless guests while Evelyn rested her fingertips lightly against the piano keys without pressing them down. Nathaniel could hear the faint ticking of his watch beneath the silence. Strange. A room that loud should never have sounded this quiet. Near the bar, the concert pianist gave a short laugh filled with disbelief. "This should be interesting," he muttered before sipping his drink. Several guests exchanged amused smiles. Others lifted phones discreetly, expecting embarrassment. A waitress touching a Steinway at one of Manhattan's most exclusive galas felt almost offensive to them. Evelyn ignored all of it. Her posture remained perfectly still. Calm shoulders, relaxed wrists. She closed her eyes briefly, not dramatically, but like someone listening for something far away. Nathaniel recognized that expression instantly. Real musicians listened before they played. Then her fingers moved. Softly at first. Almost fragile. The unfinished Chopin phrase returned beneath her hands exactly where it had been abandoned moments earlier. But this time, the melody breathed. One note answered another with quiet precision. No rushing. No vanity hidden inside the tempo. Just music unfolding naturally like rain sliding down glass. Several conversations stopped immediately. A woman near the staircase lowered her champagne flute halfway to her lips and forgot to drink. The pianist near the bar straightened slowly. Nathaniel felt something shift painfully inside his chest before he understood why. Evelyn was not performing for the room. She was protecting the music from the room. The distinction changed everything. Her fingers crossed the keyboard with effortless control while the melody deepened into something unbearably human. Not perfect in the cold technical sense wealthy audiences usually applauded. Better than perfect. Honest. The pauses between phrases carried weight. Grief. Tenderness. Memory. Nathaniel stared at her without blinking. 8 years earlier, his wife Isabella had played Chopin exactly like that inside their townhouse library during thunderstorms. Same restraint. Same lingering hesitation before the descending passage. Same impossible feeling that the music had discovered something private inside the listener. Nathaniel suddenly realized his hand had tightened around the stem of his glass hard enough to leave fingerprints. Across the ballroom, nobody seemed interested in wealth anymore. Investors stopped negotiating. Politicians stopped smiling for cameras. Even the servers paused near the walls listening quietly. Evelyn remained completely unaware of the effect she was having. Or perhaps she simply did not care. The melody expanded gently through the ballroom until the entire gala felt suspended inside it. Nathaniel noticed small details no one else would. The subtle rubato before the left-hand transition. The restraint in her dynamics. The way she allowed silence to speak instead of overpowering it. Whoever taught her understood that technique alone meant nothing without vulnerability. Near the end of the passage, Evelyn's fingers slowed slightly. Not from hesitation. Emotion. One tiny imperfection entered the phrase there. Barely noticeable. Human. Nathaniel felt it like a memory reopening. Isabella used to do the same thing whenever she played late at night after difficult days. She once told him, "People trust music more when it breathes like a person." The final notes dissolved softly beneath the chandelier light. No dramatic ending, no flourish, just quiet completion. Evelyn let her hands rest against the keys for 1 second longer before lifting them away. The ballroom remained silent. Completely silent. Not polite silence. Not confusion. Reverence. Then Nathaniel Blackwood, the coldest man most people in New York had ever met, slowly set his untouched champagne glass onto a nearby table and began to clap alone. The sound of Nathaniel's applause echoed sharply through the ballroom because nobody else moved quickly enough to join him. One pair of hands. Slow. Controlled. Genuine. Every guest turned toward him almost immediately. Some looked confused. Others looked alarmed. Nathaniel Blackwood was known for many things in Manhattan. Generosity was not usually one of them. Evelyn remained seated at the piano bench for half a second longer before standing carefully. Her expression did not change even as applause gradually spread through the room around her like reluctant rain. A few guests clapped because Nathaniel did. Others because they finally realized something extraordinary had happened. But the loudest reactions came from people who did not understand music at all. They only understood emotion. And somehow the waitress in a black uniform had just made 200 powerful strangers feel something honest. Near the bar, the concert pianist stared at Evelyn with visible disbelief. "Impossible," he muttered quietly. "Who trained her?" Nathaniel did not answer. His eyes remained fixed on Evelyn as she stepped away from the piano like she regretted touching it at all. The moment she returned to standing beside the instrument in her server uniform, the illusion broke slightly. Waitress again. Invisible again. Yet somehow the room could not quite see her that way anymore. "Miss Carter," the event manager whispered urgently while hurrying toward her. "What was that?" Evelyn picked up the empty champagne tray calmly. "An unfinished piece," she answered softly. The manager blinked, still overwhelmed. "No. Where did you learn to play like that?" Evelyn lowered her gaze briefly. "A long time ago." Before more questions could follow, another guest interrupted loudly from across the ballroom. "Play something else." Several voices agreed immediately. "Yes," another one. "Please." That was incredible. Evelyn shook her head once. "I should get back to work." But the crowd had already shifted around her. Curious now. Interested. The same people who ignored her an hour earlier suddenly searched her face for mystery. Nathaniel recognized the change instantly because he had seen it his entire life. Wealthy people loved discovering hidden brilliance after someone else validated it first. What they rarely respected was quiet talent before applause made it fashionable. Evelyn began walking away from the piano before the attention could settle too heavily on her shoulders. Nathaniel moved before thinking. "Miss Carter." His voice carried easily across the ballroom without needing volume. Evelyn stopped immediately. Not because he sounded powerful, because he sounded sincere. Slowly, she turned toward him. The entire room watched the exchange in silence. Nathaniel descended the staircase with measured steps until he stood only a few feet from her. Up close, he noticed details he had missed earlier. The faint exhaustion beneath her eyes. The tiny callus near her right thumb from years of repetition. The calm expression of someone accustomed to disappearing inside crowded rooms. "Who taught you to play Chopin like that?" he asked quietly. Evelyn held his gaze without intimidation. "My father." "Was he a pianist?" No, a faint almost smile touched her lips. "He repaired pianos in Brooklyn." Nathaniel absorbed the answer slowly. Somehow that made perfect sense. "You played the ballade differently from the published interpretation," he said. "Most people tonight would not know that. Most people tonight were listening to performance." Evelyn replied softly. "Chopin wrote loneliness. There is a difference." Several nearby guests exchanged uncomfortable glances as though they had accidentally overheard something private. Nathaniel felt the words settle heavily somewhere deep inside him. Loneliness. Strange hearing someone describe his entire evening in a single sentence. Before he could answer, Evelyn glanced toward the kitchen doors where another overwhelmed server struggled to carry a heavy tray alone. Instinctively, Evelyn stepped aside. "Excuse me," she said gently. "Someone needs help." And without waiting for praise, without lingering for admiration, Evelyn Carter walked away from the richest man in the ballroom as though kindness mattered more to her than applause. Nathaniel stood motionless for several seconds after Evelyn disappeared into the crowd, carrying another server's tray, as though nothing unusual had happened. Around him, the ballroom slowly returned to life, but the atmosphere had changed in ways nobody could fully explain. Conversations sounded quieter now, less performative. A hedge fund manager near the balcony attempted to restart a discussion about overseas markets. Yet halfway through his sentence, he lost focus entirely and glanced back toward the piano instead. The unfinished emptiness that had filled the gala earlier was gone. In its place lingered something more uncomfortable. Perspective. "Nathaniel," Senator Whitmore said carefully beside him, "you look like you have seen a ghost." Nathaniel picked up his untouched champagne again, but did not drink from it. "No," he answered softly. "Something much rarer." The senator frowned slightly, clearly expecting elaboration that never came. Across the ballroom, Evelyn resumed work as if she had not just silenced one of Manhattan's most powerful rooms with a Chopin ballade. She refilled water glasses, cleared dessert plates, helped an elderly guest adjust her shawl after noticing the woman shivering near the air conditioning vent. No dramatic awareness of herself. No attempt to capitalize on attention. Nathaniel watched all of it carefully. That interested him more than the music itself. Most talented people spent their lives begging to be noticed. Evelyn seemed almost determined to avoid it. Near the kitchen entrance, the event manager hurried toward her again, holding a business card with nervous excitement. "The Philharmonic director wants your number," she whispered. "And someone from Carnegie Hall asked if you were represented." Evelyn blinked once in surprise before gently pushing the card back toward her. "I think they are looking for someone else." "Evelyn, really?" She offered a small apologetic smile. "I work double shifts on Thursdays." The manager stared at her as though she had spoken another language entirely. Nathaniel almost smiled for the first time all evening. A famous pianist nearby overheard the conversation and approached with forced politeness, tightening his jaw. "Miss Carter," he said, "you have remarkable natural instinct." Though formal training clearly stopped too early. Several nearby guests fell silent instantly. Evelyn looked at him calmly. "Probably. Your interpretation was emotionally compelling," he continued, "but unconventional. Audiences usually prefer precision over personal sentiment." Nathaniel recognized the insult hiding inside the compliment immediately. So did Evelyn. Yet her expression remained perfectly composed. "Music is personal sentiment," she answered quietly. "Otherwise it is only mathematics." A few guests exchanged surprised glances. The pianist gave a thin smile. An interesting philosophy from a server. Nathaniel's eyes sharpened slightly at the remark. But before he could intervene, Evelyn simply nodded once. "And yet tonight it still reached you." Silence followed. Clean. Surgical. The pianist looked away first. Nathaniel watched Evelyn carefully then. No arrogance. No triumph. She had not tried to embarrass the man. She had only answered honestly. Somehow that made the moment land even harder. Across the ballroom, rain began sliding softly against the massive windows overlooking Manhattan. Tiny silver streaks beneath the city lights. Nathaniel suddenly remembered another rainy night years ago when Isabella sat barefoot at their piano laughing quietly after making a mistake halfway through Debussy. "Perfect technique is forgettable," she told him once. People remember truth. He had not thought about that sentence in years. Not until tonight. A server accidentally dropped a fork nearby, breaking the silence with a sharp metallic sound. Evelyn immediately crouched to help the embarrassed young waitress gather the fallen silverware before anyone else moved. Nathaniel noticed the younger girl whispering thank you with watery eyes. Evelyn only squeezed her shoulder gently and returned to work. Small kindnesses. Constantly. Quietly. As though dignity was something you practiced when nobody important was watching. Nathaniel realized then that the most extraordinary thing about Evelyn Carter was not that she could play Chopin by ear. It was that after making an entire ballroom admire her, she still chose to remain kind. By 10:30, the gala should have been winding down into predictable luxury. Speeches, charity pledges, polite applause from people already checking the time beneath the table. Instead, guests kept glancing toward Evelyn Carter every time she crossed the ballroom carrying another tray. Not openly. Manhattan elites were too disciplined for that. But curiosity followed her now in subtle ways. Conversations paused when she passed. Investors lowered their voices around her, as though suddenly aware she might understand more than they assumed. Nathaniel noticed all of it from across the room while pretending to listen to a museum director discuss European acquisitions. Nathaniel, the woman repeated with an awkward smile. You seem distracted tonight. He looked at her politely. Do I? You have not heard a word I said. Normally, he would have apologized automatically. Tonight, he simply glanced toward the piano again, empty now beneath the chandelier light. No, he admitted quietly. Near the ballroom entrance, Evelyn helped an elderly couple into their coats while Rain continued tapping softly against the windows overlooking Fifth Avenue. The husband struggled slightly with the buttons on his sleeve due to arthritis. Before he could become embarrassed, Evelyn gently fastened them for him without making the moment feel pitiful. There, she said softly. Perfect. Thank you, sweetheart. The woman whispered warmly. Evelyn smiled. Drive safely. The streets are slippery tonight. Nathaniel watched the exchange from a distance with growing fascination. Wealthy people often donated millions while remaining emotionally absent from the person standing directly in front of them. Evelyn seemed incapable of overlooking anyone. Mr. Blackwood. His assistant appeared beside him holding a tablet. The board members are ready for the closing toast. Nathaniel's eyes lingered briefly on Evelyn before shifting away. Delay at 10 minutes. His assistant blinked. Sir. 10. The man nodded immediately and disappeared into the crowd. Across the room, the famous pianist approached Evelyn again near the coffee station, though this time the arrogance in his posture had softened into uneasy curiosity. You said your father repaired pianos, he began carefully. Where did you study? Evelyn poured coffee into delicate white cups before answering. Brooklyn Conservatory when I was younger. Only Brooklyn Conservatory. That was enough. The pianist hesitated. No, it was not. Evelyn finally looked up at him then. Calm eyes. Tired eyes. Maybe not. He lowered his voice slightly. You have international-level phrasing control. That does not disappear accidentally. For the first time all evening, something flickered behind Evelyn's expression. Not anger. Old sadness. Some things disappear anyway, she said quietly. The pianist seemed about to ask another question when Nathaniel approached them both. The surrounding guests immediately pretended not to watch. Mr. Bellamy, Nathaniel said evenly to the pianist, the foundation appreciates your performance this evening. Bellamy understood the dismissal instantly. After a brief nod, he walked away without argument. Nathaniel turned toward Evelyn. Up close again, he noticed faint shadows beneath her eyes that expensive makeup could never fully hide. Exhaustion lived there. Years of it perhaps. You avoided every important person in this room tonight, he said softly. Evelyn handed a coffee cup to a passing guest before answering. I was working. That is not the same thing. A faint smile touched her lips. Maybe for people like you. Nathaniel should have been offended. Instead, he found himself strangely impressed. Nobody spoke to him that honestly anymore. And what exactly are people like me? He asked. Evelyn considered the question seriously before answering. People who spend so much time being admired that they forget how to listen. The words landed gently. No accusation. Just truth. Nathaniel looked at her for a long, quiet moment while rain shimmered behind the ballroom windows like scattered silver threads. Then, almost before realizing why he asked it, he said softly, What happened to your music, Evelyn? For the first time that night, she looked away. Evelyn's eyes drifted toward the rain-streaked windows before returning to the coffee cups lined neatly across the silver tray between them. For a few seconds, she said nothing at all. Nathaniel noticed the silence did not feel evasive. It felt careful, like someone approaching a room filled with fragile things in the dark. Around them, the gala continued moving with polished elegance. A waiter crossed the ballroom carrying miniature desserts beneath soft golden light. Someone laughed too loudly near the balcony. Cameras flashed beside a charity auction display no one genuinely cared about. Yet inside the quiet space forming between Nathaniel and Evelyn, the rest of the ballroom seemed strangely distant. My music did not belong to me anymore, Evelyn said softly at last. Nathaniel remained still. What does that mean? She gave a faint tired smile without humor. It means people started loving what I could do more than who I was. The sentence settled heavily between them. Nathaniel understood it immediately in ways he did not expect. You were famous. It was not a question. Evelyn adjusted the position of a spoon beside one of the coffee cups before answering. For a little while. How little? Enough for strangers to recognize me in airports before I turned 20. Nathaniel stared at her quietly. Somewhere in the back of his mind, fragmented memories began shifting into place. Newspaper articles years ago. A young blonde pianist photographed beside concert halls in Europe. Interviews describing a prodigy with impossible emotional interpretation. Then suddenly nothing. She disappeared. At the time, the arts world had treated it like temporary scandal gossip before moving on to the next rising star. Nathaniel looked at her more carefully now. Evelyn Carter, he said slowly, almost to himself. You were at Vienna. Her hand stopped moving for half a second. A long time ago. You played Rachmaninoff with the New York Philharmonic when you were 19. She looked mildly surprised. You remember that? Nathaniel glanced toward the piano across the ballroom. My wife made me listen to the recording 3 times. Something softened briefly in Evelyn's expression at the mention of his wife. She had good taste. Nathaniel almost smiled again. Almost. What happened after that? He asked quietly. Evelyn exhaled slowly through her nose while distant thunder rolled softly beyond the Manhattan skyline. My father got sick. Nathaniel waited. Cancer, she added simply. Everything happened very fast after that. The ballroom noise faded again around him as he listened. The treatments were expensive. Concert sponsors wanted appearances. Interviews. Smiles. Her fingers traced the edge of the silver tray unconsciously. People become uncomfortable when talented young women stop looking inspirational. Nathaniel's jaw tightened slightly. He knew that world too well. Investors loved genius as long as it remained convenient and beautiful. Then came the article. Evelyn continued quietly. Someone accused my father of manipulating competition judges when I was younger. Nathaniel remembered suddenly. Not clearly. Just headlines. Rumors. Ethics investigations. He also remembered how quickly the public enjoyed destroying gifted people once admiration became boring. It was not true, Evelyn said before he could ask. But truth moves slowly. Headlines move fast. A server passed nearby carrying empty wine glasses while Evelyn stepped aside automatically to help steady the tray before continuing. Small kindness again. Reflexive now. After my father died, I stopped playing. Nathaniel looked at her carefully. Completely. Evelyn nodded once. Tonight was the first time in almost 8 years. Something inside Nathaniel shifted painfully at that admission. 8 years of silence hidden beneath coffee refills and polished silverware. 8 years carrying music quietly inside herself while strangers walked past without noticing. Across the ballroom, guests still glanced toward Evelyn occasionally, unaware they were standing 10 feet away from someone the classical world once considered extraordinary. Nathaniel lowered his voice slightly. Why tonight? Evelyn looked toward the empty piano beneath the chandelier. Rain shimmered against the windows behind it like blurred city lights melting into darkness. Because, she said softly, for the first time in years, I heard someone murder Chopin badly enough that I could not stay silent. Nathaniel laughed quietly before he could stop himself. Not the polished social laugh he used at board meetings or interviews. A real one. Brief. Surprised. Evelyn looked slightly startled by the sound. That might be the most honest thing anyone has said tonight, he admitted. A faint smile touched her lips again before disappearing just as quickly. Around them, the gala had finally begun dissolving into its final hour. Guests drifted toward the exits beneath soft golden light, while valets rotated luxury cars through the rain outside. Somewhere near the ballroom entrance, an auction coordinator thanked donors with exhausted enthusiasm. Yet Nathaniel remained standing beside a coffee station speaking to a waitress while half the city's elite pretended not to stare. 10 years ago, the tabloids would have called it a scandal. Tonight, it simply felt human. You disappeared completely after the accusations, Nathaniel said carefully. No interviews. No comeback performances. Nothing. Evelyn adjusted a folded linen napkin beside the tray before answering. People like redemption stories more than actual healing. Nathaniel understood that sentence too well. And did you heal? Evelyn considered the question honestly. Some parts. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows overlooking Manhattan, while distant traffic lights blurred beneath the storm. Nathaniel noticed the way Evelyn always paused slightly before answering personal questions, as though making sure the truth would not disturb the room too much. My father used to say audiences can hear exhaustion before they hear mistakes, she said quietly. Toward the end, I was too tired to touch a piano. So you walked away. I survived. Nathaniel looked at her carefully after that. Most people in rooms like this measured success publicly. Wealth, titles, recognition. But something about Evelyn suggested she measured life differently now. Quieter things. Breathing room. Peace. The ability to sleep without strangers demanding pieces of you. Nearby, two younger guests whispered while pretending to examine the dessert table. One of them finally approached, nervously holding a phone. Excuse me, the woman said to Evelyn. I am sorry to interrupt, but were you really Evelyn Carter from Vienna? Nathaniel watched Evelyn's posture tighten, almost invisibly. A long time ago, she answered gently. My mother used to play your recordings every Sunday morning. The young woman continued with genuine emotion. She said nobody understood melancholy like you did. Evelyn looked momentarily caught off guard by the sincerity. That is very kind. Would you maybe sign something? The woman held out a Gala program hopefully. Nathaniel expected Evelyn to refuse. Instead, she accepted the pen carefully and signed her name in small, elegant handwriting near the bottom corner. The young woman smiled brightly. Thank you. Really. After she walked away, Evelyn stared at the pen for one quiet second before setting it down beside the coffee tray. Nathaniel noticed the subtle tremor in her fingers afterward. Not fear. Memory. You miss it, he said softly. Evelyn looked toward the piano again across the ballroom. Empty beneath the chandelier now. Waiting. Every day, she admitted. Then why stay away? She exhaled slowly. Because music was the one thing in my life that never lied to me. Nathaniel frowned slightly, not understanding. Evelyn's eyes lowered toward the polished marble floor reflecting ballroom light, like water. People applauded me while writing articles about my father. Her voice remained calm, but quieter now. Sponsors sent flowers while privately asking whether I would become too difficult to market after the scandal. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He knew exactly how those conversations happened behind closed doors. Eventually, Evelyn continued, I realized the stage only loved me when I looked unbroken. Silence settled between them again. Heavy this time. Honest. Then suddenly, from across the ballroom, a slow, familiar melody drifted softly through the speakers overhead. Debussy. Clair de Lune. Nathaniel froze almost instantly. Isabella's favorite piece. Evelyn noticed the change in his expression immediately. Your wife? She asked gently. Nathaniel looked toward the rain beyond the windows before answering. She died 3 years ago. Evelyn's eyes softened with immediate understanding. No pity, just recognition. The kind shared only between people who knew what silence sounded like after losing someone. For several seconds, neither of them spoke after the music changed overhead. Debussy floated softly through hidden ballroom speakers while rain pressed gently against the tall windows surrounding Manhattan in silver reflections. Around them, guests continued leaving beneath umbrellas and camera flashes, unaware that two strangers beside a coffee station had suddenly stopped pretending to be untouched by grief. Nathaniel loosened his grip slightly around the champagne glass in his hand. She loved this piece, he said quietly. Evelyn glanced toward the ceiling speakers as though listening carefully to the spaces between the notes instead of the melody itself. Most people play it too softly, she answered. They mistake gentleness for weakness. Nathaniel looked at her then. And what was she? Evelyn met his gaze calmly. Strong enough to leave silence in someone after she was gone. The words struck him harder than he expected. Nathaniel had spent 3 years surviving condolences from people who spoke about Isabella like a tragic headline. Elegant woman. Philanthropist. Beautiful marriage. Nobody ever described the actual emptiness grief left inside ordinary moments. The silence at breakfast. The untouched side of the closet. Music playing in rooms where someone no longer existed. But somehow Evelyn understood instinctively. How did she die? Evelyn asked softly after a moment. Nathaniel's eyes drifted toward the rain outside. Heart condition. He paused briefly. Unexpected. Evelyn nodded once. No dramatic sympathy. No forced softness. Just understanding again. My father used to say grief changes the acoustics of a person, she murmured quietly. Nathaniel frowned slightly. What does that mean? Evelyn looked toward the piano across the ballroom. Everything echoes longer afterward. Nathaniel stared at her in silence. Across the room, Servers began clearing centerpieces from empty tables while the remaining guests gathered coats and exchanged polished goodbyes. The gala was ending. Yet Nathaniel suddenly felt unwilling to let the conversation end with it. "Did your father teach you that too?" he asked. Evelyn smiled faintly. "No, losing him did." The answer settled between them like another unfinished melody. Nearby, Nathaniel's assistant approached carefully, clearly uncertain whether interrupting would be wise. "Sir," he said quietly, "the board members are waiting downstairs for the closing statements." Nathaniel did not look away from Evelyn immediately. "Tell them I will be 10 more minutes." The assistant blinked once in surprise. Nathaniel Blackwood had never delayed important investors for personal conversation before. "Of course, sir." After the man walked away, Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "You should not keep billionaires waiting. Most billionaires should learn patience." She laughed softly then. Small. Genuine. The sound caught Nathaniel off guard more than the piano had. It transformed her face completely. Younger somehow. Lighter. For one brief second, he could almost picture the 19-year-old prodigy hidden beneath years of exhaustion and quiet survival. "What?" Evelyn asked after noticing him watching her. Nathaniel shook his head slightly. "Nothing." But it was not nothing. He realized suddenly that this was the first conversation in years where nobody wanted anything from him. No donation. No influence. No strategic alliance. Evelyn spoke to him the same way she probably spoke to the dishwasher staff in the kitchen or the elderly couple near the entrance. Calmly. Honestly. Like wealth did not alter the value of a person. "You know," Evelyn said softly while collecting empty coffee cups onto the tray, "your wife must have loved you very much." Nathaniel looked genuinely startled. "Why would you say that?" Evelyn adjusted one of the cups carefully before answering. "Because people who are deeply loved usually become softer in private than they appear in public." Nathaniel felt the words settle somewhere uncomfortably deep inside him. Isabella used to say something similar. That beneath all his discipline and control lived a man terrified of disappointing people he cared about. He had not heard anyone speak to that hidden version of himself in years. Across the ballroom, the final guest slowly disappeared into the storm outside, while Debussy continued drifting softly through the emptying room. Nathaniel realized then that tonight had stopped feeling like a gala hours ago. Somehow, quietly, it had become a conversation between two people who understood loneliness too well to pretend otherwise. By 11:15, the ballroom had nearly emptied completely. The orchestra equipment sat abandoned near the west wall beneath dimmed chandeliers, while hotel staff quietly folded linen tablecloths and stacked silver chairs with the careful exhaustion of people who had spent all night making elegance appear effortless. Outside, rain continued washing Manhattan in silver reflections. The city looked softer through water, less certain of itself. Evelyn carried the last tray of untouched champagne toward the service hallway while Nathaniel remained beside the tall windows overlooking Central Park. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed faintly through the storm before disappearing again into the night. "You are still here," Evelyn said gently after noticing him standing alone. Nathaniel turned slightly toward her. "Apparently so are you. I am being paid to stay, and I am paying for the building." That earned another quiet laugh from her. Nathaniel realized he had started anticipating those small moments the way people wait for familiar songs to reach their favorite passage. "Do you ever miss performing?" he asked after a pause. Evelyn set the tray down onto a nearby table before answering. "Not the performing itself." "What then?" She glanced toward the empty ballroom behind them. "The feeling right before the first note." Nathaniel watched her carefully. "What feeling is that?" Evelyn thought about it for a second. "Possibility." The word lingered softly between them. Nathaniel understood it instantly. Not because of music. Because he remembered what life felt like before success hardened into routine. Before every conversation became strategic. Before grief transformed entire years into survival instead of living. "You should play again," he said quietly. Evelyn lowered her eyes almost immediately. "People always say that after one good night." Tonight was not one good night. She shook her head gently. "Nathaniel, the world I came from only forgives people when forgiveness becomes profitable." "Then perhaps you are speaking to the wrong world." Evelyn looked at him then with a faint expression he could not fully read. Sadness maybe. Or caution. "You still believe powerful people can fix broken things." Nathaniel held her gaze steadily. No, I believe powerful people usually notice broken things too late. Silence settled again while rain traced slow lines down the windows behind them. Near the ballroom exit, the hotel pianist quietly closed the lid of the Steinway before preparing to wheel it away for the night. Evelyn's eyes followed the movement unconsciously. Nathaniel noticed immediately. Play something else, he said softly. She blinked in surprise. Now, the room is empty. Exactly. Nathaniel glanced around the nearly abandoned ballroom. No audience left to disappoint. For a second, Evelyn looked almost tempted. Then she shook her head once more. I cannot. Or you are afraid to. The words were not cruel, just honest. Evelyn looked down at her hands. Nathaniel noticed the tiny tension returning to her shoulders for the first time all evening. Do you know what happens when people hear something beautiful from you? She asked quietly. They start expecting you to save them with it. Nathaniel frowned slightly. And Evelyn gave a small, tired smile. Eventually, you forget how to save yourself. The sentence struck him with uncomfortable force because he suddenly realized she was no longer talking only about music. Before he could answer, the ballroom doors opened and a cold gust of rain-scented air swept through the room. Nathaniel's assistant approached, carefully holding a black umbrella and several folders tucked beneath one arm. Sir, he said apologetically, the board members finally left. Your driver is waiting downstairs. Nathaniel nodded once, but did not move immediately. His attention remained fixed on Evelyn standing beside the empty ballroom beneath fading chandelier light. She looked strangely out of place now that the gala illusion had disappeared. Not because she seemed beneath it, because she seemed more real than any of it. Nathaniel reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and removed a simple ivory business card embossed only with his name and private number. No title, no company logo, just Nathaniel Blackwood. He held it toward her carefully. If you ever decide possibility still matters, he said quietly, call me. Evelyn looked at the card for several long seconds without taking it. Evelyn stared at the ivory card resting between Nathaniel's fingers while rain whispered softly against the ballroom windows behind them. The chandeliers had dimmed lower now, casting long golden reflections across the polished marble floor where only hours earlier Manhattan's elite had competed for attention beneath camera flashes and expensive perfume. Now the room felt almost honest. Empty chairs, half-cleared tables, wilted white roses leaning inside crystal vases after a night spent pretending permanence. Nathaniel remained still, offering the card without pressure. No billionaire confidence. No rehearsed persuasion. Just quiet sincerity. Evelyn finally lifted her eyes toward him. You should know, she said softly. People usually offer opportunities because they want something beautiful attached to their name. Nathaniel nodded once. Probably true. And you? He glanced briefly toward the rain beyond the windows before answering. I think I am tired of rooms where nobody says what they actually mean. The honesty in the sentence unsettled her more than charm would have. Evelyn looked down at the card again, but still did not take it. You barely know me. That is not entirely true. She almost smiled. You heard me play one Chopin piece. No, Nathaniel said quietly. I watched how you treated people when nobody important was looking. The ballroom fell silent again after that. Somewhere down the hallway, hotel staff rolled silverware carts across marble floors with soft metallic echoes fading into the distance. Evelyn lowered her gaze briefly, visibly affected by the remark in ways she did not want to reveal openly. Most people praise talent first. Nathaniel had noticed kindness instead. That is a dangerous thing to value in someone, she murmured. Why? Because kind people usually break quietly. Nathaniel looked at her carefully then. And yet you survived. Evelyn's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the tray she still carried. Surviving is not the same thing as returning. Nathaniel understood immediately. Grief changed people permanently. Some losses did not heal cleanly. They simply taught you how to carry absence differently. Outside, thunder rolled faintly above Manhattan, while headlights blurred beneath rain-soaked streets 40 floors below. The city looked distant from up here. Smaller somehow. My wife used to volunteer at children's hospitals without telling anyone, Nathaniel said after a pause. Evelyn listened quietly. One day I asked why she kept it private. She said kindness loses something the moment it becomes performance. Evelyn's expression softened almost invisibly. She sounds rare. She was. Nathaniel looked down briefly at the card still waiting between them. Tonight reminded me of her. Evelyn blinked once, caught off guard by the admission. Nathaniel clarified immediately. Not romantically. His voice remained calm. Just the way she listened to people beneath what they were pretending to be. The explanation seemed to relax something inside Evelyn she had not realized was tense. Slowly, she set the empty tray onto a nearby table. Then, after several long seconds, she accepted the card from his hand. Nathaniel noticed how carefully she held it. Not like a business opportunity. More like something fragile. I cannot promise anything, Evelyn said softly. I am not asking for promises. She looked at the simple black lettering beneath his name. No company titles. No wealth displayed. Just Nathaniel Blackwood. Human before powerful. What exactly would happen if I called? She asked quietly. Nathaniel considered the question honestly. I do not know. That answer surprised her more than any polished proposal could have. Most powerful men always spoke with certainty. Nathaniel sounded almost relieved to admit uncertainty instead. Maybe nothing, he continued. Maybe coffee. Maybe conversation. Maybe a piano in a quiet room where nobody expects you to save them. Evelyn looked away for a second after hearing that. Toward the empty Steinway beneath fading chandelier light. Toward the possibility she had spent 8 years trying not to miss too much. Then the hotel manager's voice echoed gently from the service hallway. Evelyn, we are heading out. Reality returning. The night ending. Evelyn slipped the ivory card carefully into the pocket of her black uniform before lifting her coat from the back of a nearby chair. Good night, Nathaniel. He nodded once. Good night, Evelyn. Neither of them moved immediately afterward, as though both understood that certain conversations quietly alter the direction of a life long before either person realizes it. 3 months later, the first snow of December drifted softly across Manhattan, while warm piano music floated through the restored recital hall on West 72nd Street. The building had once been abandoned beneath years of dust and financial neglect until the Blackwood Foundation quietly purchased it without press releases or interviews. No giant banners carried Nathaniel's name outside. No photographers crowded the entrance. Just a modest brass plaque near the front door that read, "The Carter Room for Young Musicians." Inside, nearly 200 people sat beneath golden lights listening so carefully that even breathing felt loud between notes. Teachers, students, elderly couples, hospital nurses still wearing winter coats, young artists holding discounted balcony tickets with nervous excitement. Not one person inside the hall had been selected for status. Nathaniel insisted on that personally. In the center of the stage, Evelyn Carter sat at a black Steinway beneath soft amber light with her hands resting gently above the keys. No glittering designer gown. No manufactured celebrity image. Just a simple dark blue dress and the calm expression of someone no longer hiding from herself. The audience waited quietly. Nathaniel stood near the back row instead of the private balcony reserved for donors. He preferred it there. Less visible. More honest. As the first notes of Chopin filled the hall, something changed in the room almost immediately. Not excitement. Not spectacle. Peace. Evelyn no longer played like someone trying to prove she deserved to be heard. She played like someone finally unafraid of being understood. The melody rose softly beneath the old theater ceiling, while snow drifted beyond stained glass windows overlooking the city. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly during the second movement, and, for the first time since Isabella's death, music no longer felt like a wound reopening. It felt like air returning to a room sealed shut too long. Across the audience, a young girl in the third row leaned forward with tears shining in her eyes, while her exhausted mother squeezed her hand gently. Near the aisle, an elderly man who once repaired pianos in Brooklyn sat listening proudly beside an empty seat where Evelyn's father should have been. Nathaniel arranged that quietly too after discovering the old man had taught music to neighborhood children for nearly 40 years without charging families who could not afford lessons. Evelyn had cried silently when she saw him before the concert. Not dramatic tears. The kind that come from finally realizing kindness survived somewhere after all. The final notes drifted softly into silence beneath the golden lights. No immediate applause followed. Just stillness. Real stillness. The kind that only happens when people are afraid clapping too quickly might break something beautiful still hanging in the air. Then slowly, The audience rose to their feet together. Not because a famous pianist demanded admiration. Because for 1 hour, Evelyn Carter reminded them that tenderness still existed in a world obsessed with performance. Nathaniel remained standing near the back as applause filled the hall around him. Evelyn's eyes found his briefly across the crowd. No dramatic romance. No perfect cinematic ending. Just quiet understanding between two people who once carried loneliness alone and no longer had to. Later that night, after the audience disappeared into the snowy Manhattan streets, Nathaniel walked past the empty stage while Evelyn closed the piano lid carefully beneath dimmed theater lights. "You were right," she said softly without looking up. Nathaniel stopped beside the stage. "About what?" Evelyn rested her hand gently against the polished black piano. A faint smile touched her face. Possibility. Outside, snow continued falling silently over the city while warm light glowed through the theater windows behind them. And somewhere beyond the noise of wealth and headlines and crowded rooms pretending to matter, music lived again because one quiet waitress finally remembered she never needed permission to be extraordinary. If this story stayed with you tonight, perhaps it is because we all know someone the world underestimated too quickly. Share your thoughts below, and if you believe quiet kindness still deserves a place in this world, stay with us for more stories like this.